My name is Tony, and what if I told you that one of rugby's greatest legends is worried about the biggest opportunity the sport has ever had? Not worried about the players. Not worried about the stadiums. Not worried about the competition. He is worried that nobody might even notice it is happening. That warning has come from Chris Latham, one of the most respected figures in Australian rugby history, a man who has played on the sport's biggest stages and experienced World Cups, Lions series, and some of rugby's most unforgettable moments. And what he recently discovered in the United States left him genuinely concerned about the future of the 2031 Rugby World Cup. The United States is preparing to host rugby's biggest event for the very first time. For years, fans, officials, and executives have described it as a game-changing moment. Many believe it could unlock a massive new audience and transform rugby's future forever. But according to Chris Latham, there may be a problem that nobody saw coming. A problem that could threaten everything. And the strange part is that he discovered it by accident. At the moment, Chris Latham is the head coach of the Chicago Hounds, one of the strongest teams in Major League Rugby. The former Wallabies superstar has built a new life in America and is watching closely as international sport prepares to take center stage in the country. As someone who represented Australia in 3 Rugby World Cups and earned 78 international caps, Chris Latham understands exactly how major sporting events are supposed to feel. When a World Cup arrives in a country, everyone knows. You see advertisements everywhere. You hear people talking about it. The media covers every angle. The excitement becomes impossible to avoid. At least, that is what Chris Latham expected. Then something happened that completely shocked him. On the very day of an important FIFA World Cup warm-up match, played at his own team's stadium in Illinois, he had no idea the game was even taking place. Think about that for a moment. A major international soccer match. National teams preparing for the biggest tournament in the world. Thousands of fans expected to attend. And the coach whose team calls the stadium home didn't even know it was happening. For Chris Latham, that was a huge surprise. The match featured Venezuela against Iraq. Even more surprisingly, one of the teams was being coached by an Australian. That coach was Graham Arnold, the former Socceroos boss who had taken charge of Iraq. Yet despite all those connections, despite being deeply involved in professional sport every single day, Chris Latham only discovered the match was taking place at the last minute. And that immediately raised a much bigger question. If one of the world's biggest sporting events can arrive with so little visibility, what does that mean for rugby? The concern became a major topic among the coaching staff. According to Chris Latham, they had already been discussing whether the FIFA World Cup could help generate excitement and momentum ahead of the Rugby World Cup that America will host in 2031. What they expected was a nation buzzing with anticipation. What they experienced was something very different. The feeling among the coaches was that the tournament simply wasn't impossible to ignore. Instead, it felt surprisingly quiet. And that is what worried Chris Latham. Because if the most famous sporting tournament on the planet struggles to dominate public attention, rugby faces an even bigger challenge. Soccer already has a substantial presence in the United States. Its popularity has been growing for years. Major League Soccer continues to expand, international stars have helped increase interest. Millions of young Americans play the sport. And yet, according to Chris Latham's experience, the build-up still felt less visible than expected. Now compare that to rugby. A sport that remains relatively niche in America. A sport that is still fighting for attention against football, basketball, baseball, hockey, and soccer. A sport that many casual American sports fans have never watched. Suddenly, the challenge becomes much clearer. Yet the story does not end there. Because there is another side to this conversation. Despite Chris Latham's concerns, the numbers tell an interesting story. The Venezuela vs. Iraq match attracted more than 10,000 spectators. Fans reportedly traveled from across the United States and even from Canada to support Iraq. So the audience was there. The passion was there. The interest was there. What may have been missing was visibility. And that distinction is extremely important. Because if fans are willing to travel hundreds or even thousands of miles to support their teams, then perhaps the challenge is not demand. Perhaps the challenge is awareness. Perhaps the challenge is making sure people know what is happening. For rugby, that lesson could become incredibly valuable. The 2031 Rugby World Cup is not just another tournament. It represents one of the most ambitious projects in the history of the sport. For the first time, the Men's Rugby World Cup will be staged in the United States. The country will also host the Women's Rugby World Cup 2 years later. My name